Good evening. A week is a long time in politics, and Donald Trump's strategy of shock and awe has certainly left European allies and Ukraine scrambling, and the Russians hoping this is a new dawn or a turning point in relations with the US, all in a week's work. Think about it. When Donald Trump came to power, Russia was the bad guy of Europe, isolated and sanctioned. But this image says it all. The top diplomats from Washington and Moscow seated at the same table, apparently to start peace talks. And you'll notice there's no Ukrainian president, no representatives from Europe, even though it's their citizens who will likely be most affected by the fallout from any quick deal. A deal which could also involve getting the Europeans to foot the bill and send peacekeeping troops. Volodymyr Zelensky was due to travel to the talks, but he's cancelled his flight. He's likely to be exacerbated by this rapid thawing of relations, the promises of embassies possibly being reopened just 6 days after that phone call between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. We'll discuss the likely impact of this race towards peace at any cost with our correspondents in Riyadh, Kyiv, Moscow and Washington. But let's get started with a report from our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes.
Positive, upbeat and constructive. The US assessment of this extraordinary meeting, a thawing of ties between two foes on ice since Russia invaded Ukraine. Kyiv on the agenda, but not in the room.
The goal is to bring an end to this conflict in a way that's fair, enduring, sustainable, and acceptable to all parties involved. What that looks like, well, that's what the ongoing engagement is going to be all about.
Russia's top diplomat called the 4-hour discussion in Saudi Arabia useful and gave an indication of Moscow's red lines on Ukraine.
We explained today that the presence of troops from NATO countries, but under a foreign flag, under the flag of the European Union or under national flags, it doesn't change anything in this regard. This is, of course, unacceptable to us.
Ominous words for Ukraine's president, putting on a brave face on a visit to Turkey. Volodymyr Zelensky wants British and other foreign forces on the ground to secure any ceasefire deal. In a sign of his displeasure at the talks between Washington and Moscow, he ditched a plan to travel on to Saudi Arabia.
I am convinced that for Ukraine and for our region, for Europe, it is critical that any negotiations to end the war are not happening behind the backs of the key parties affected by the Russian aggression.
In central Kyiv, a memorial to those who gave their lives fighting Russia's invasion. A reminder, too, of the role America has played in supporting Ukraine. It makes the actions by Donald Trump all the harder for Ukrainians to understand.
What they're doing is crazy because it's our problem. It's a problem between us and this country, Russia. And if they don't want to talk straight with us, this is really strange.
Unfortunately, in our world, I'm afraid it's not democracy already, but it is a power of strongest. It is pity. It is big pity.
Washington's new envoy to Ukraine is due here in the coming hours, but Keith Kellogg may well receive a frosty reception.
President Zelensky's decision to head home rather than go to Saudi Arabia sends the clearest possible signal that he's not joking when he says Ukraine will never accept any peace talks that happen without its direct involvement.
This country does want an end to Russia's war, but it needs clear guarantees Vladimir Putin won't attack again. Otherwise, all this sacrifice would have been in vain. Deborah Haynes, Sky News, Kyiv.
So who was around that table in Riyadh today? US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, America's top diplomat and chief foreign affairs advisor to the president. US National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, who's a Green Beret veteran who served in Afghanistan and the Middle East, as well as Africa. Steve Witkoff is Donald Trump's special Middle East envoy, a longtime friend of the president and a fellow billionaire real estate developer. All three less than a month into their jobs. Representing Russia was Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, a diplomat who's been in the role for more than 20 years. Sitting with him, Foreign Policy Advisor Yuri Yushchenko. He served as Russia's ambassador to the US for a decade from 1998. But as we know, it's not who's there. That there's just as much striking to do. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen was absent, and so was Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who insists he won't accept any outcomes from talks that his country isn't part of. Well, here's our team tonight. Security and Defence Editor Deborah Haynes. She's in Kiev. We'll also speak to Moscow correspondent Ivor Bennett. US correspondent James Matthews is in Washington. And we'll begin with NBC's chief international correspondent, Keir Simmons, who joins us from Riyadh. Keir, thanks so much for joining us. We'll begin with you. I mean, this really is a turning point in Washington's handling of Europe's most destructive conflict in decades.
It really is. It's head-spinning. It's stunning. It's really America first. When you think about it, the expectation might have been for this meeting here in Riyadh that President Trump's team would walk in and talk pretty much solely only about how to achieve some kind of a ceasefire in Russia. That's what President Trump promised during the election. Instead, what we appear to have is a roadmap for how to put relations back on track, if you like, between Russia and the United States. It is America first. As you mentioned, Europe not at the table, President Zelensky not at the table. Now, they are being told that they will be involved later. But the really striking thing here was talk, for example, of cooperation between the United States and Russia, talk here in Riyadh of cooperation on geopolitical issues, on economic issues by the United States, which, of course, is the leader of the West's sanctions campaign against Russia. Effectively, what you had the Trump administration doing here in Riyadh today was unlocking that sanctions campaign, that attempt at isolating Russia and bringing in a seismic shift in relations between Washington and Moscow, with all of the implications for other capitals around the world.
Keir, thank you so much. Let's go to Ukraine now, where we can speak to our Deborah Haynes. And Deborah, we were together in Munich over the weekend. We heard Volodymyr Zelensky speak there. I mean, no surprises that he's totally unsettled and really scrambling almost over what's been going on over the course of not just the last 24 hours, but frankly, the last week.
Yes, and if you wanted any clearer signal of the lack of sincerity when it comes to Russia's engagement with peace talks, just a few minutes ago we heard anti-aircraft guns here and the sound of a drone overhead. Again, a sign of Russia continuing to attack this country, even as it is sitting around the table with the United States. And I think that image that we have seen over the last few hours in Saudi Arabia of the US and Russia across that table underlines how Donald Trump's strongman diplomacy is all about power. That's the only currency that really counts. And it underlines this upending of all of the security assumptions that not only underpinned the way that the West was viewing Ukraine's war, but the way that the West regards its own security in the face of threats, including from Moscow. The US is unilaterally making this move, and it's going to be very uncomfortable, I think, for Keith Kellogg, who is going to be arriving here in Kyiv as the US envoy on Ukraine to meet with Volodymyr Zelensky. I bumped into a former senior US official here in Kyiv earlier today who was raising eyebrows at me when I asked about why Keith Kellogg wasn't also in Saudi Arabia. What does that actually mean about the power and the legitimacy that he has to be speaking on behalf of Donald Trump when he wasn't actually in the room in Riyadh?
Yeah, absolutely, Deborah. Let's go to our Ivor Bennett, who joins us from Moscow. I mean, Ivor, it's quite extraordinary, isn't it? When you think about where Russia was just a month ago, how much things have changed for them in the course of, frankly, the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, absolutely, Yalda. I think on the surface in Riyadh, Russia was playing it cool. Sergei Lavrov is a career diplomat, been in post for more than 20 years. He never gives much away. But make no mistake, Moscow will be elated at this because, for starters, they have a seat at the table once more, not just any table. This was the top table, superpower to superpower, so the isolation of the last 3 years is over. The second reason why they'll be pleased is because of the chance for a real reboot and reset of relations with Washington. All this talk of economic cooperation, for Russia that means the lifting of sanctions, and by the sound of things, sanctions and the resumption of ties is being tied to a peace deal from the get-go because it's being talked about at this early stage. And the third thing to say is that it looks like Russia is getting to dictate the terms of the peace deal and call the shots. Marco Rubio talks about the need for all sides to make concessions, but there's no sign of that at the moment from Moscow. If anything, Russia's position is hardening, particularly on the issue of future security guarantees for Ukraine, with Sergei Lavrov saying it's not only NATO membership for Ukraine that would be unacceptable to Russia, but also now the presence of NATO member troops there in the future, no matter what flag they're flying. So Russia there reiterating one red line and trying to draw another, I think, as it seeks to exploit this privileged position it has at the negotiating table.
Thanks so much, Ivor. Let's go to James Matthews, who joins us from Washington. James, we've seen shock and awe, frankly, from Donald Trump over the course of the last few weeks. But also, we know that every American president who's come into office has tried to have some kind of working relationship with the Russians, and they haven't necessarily succeeded. We'll have to really wait and see how this particular plan unfolds.
That's right, yeah, Yalda. Yeah, it's certainly a stark contrast, getting starker between Biden's position. Certainly, his view was nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. The position we're in now would appear to be far beyond that. People in the Biden administration, they talk, Yalda, about how in 3 years of conflict, they never saw any inclination by Putin to negotiate in any kind of constructive way. Those same people are saying today that that's changed because Putin sees opportunity, not for the sake of peace per se, but for the sake of his own benefit. That for all the talk of a just peace, a deal that leans towards Moscow is no peace at all. We're seeing a handbrake turn in terms of dealing with the Russians, and it is inherently dangerous for Trump and for us all. There is a gamble for him, America's superpower status. It's reinforced by its alliances. To disregard that is to weaken it and to strengthen Putin. He benefits from alliances undermined by a growing lack of trust, and I think that's what we have. For all the talk of, a just peace, a deal that does favour Putin, if that's what transpires, rewards him, and it encourages him that if he's seen to outplay the United States, security guarantor in chief, then there is no security against an empowered Russian leader in future, that he's in a position to reset and to ready himself to go again. Who knows where next? And of course, all the time, America's other adversaries are watching on.
Absolutely. James, thank you. And thank you to our correspondents from Riyadh there to Washington. Now, I want to focus on a British couple, Craig and Lindsay Foreman. They were on the trip of a lifetime. They say they were on a motorcycle mission around the world to meet different people and experience new ways of life. But the Iranian authorities saw it differently, saying they were gathering information. They've now been charged with espionage. Here's our international correspondent, John Sparks.
Morning. It was the trip of a lifetime, an expedition and an experience in parts of the world untouched by mass tourism.
We've stopped just to take in the view, which is spectacular.
But Britain's Craig and Lindsay Foreman have got themselves into trouble in Iran. Last week, the official news agency released this picture, depicting two British nationals, it said, arrested on security-related charges. Their faces have been blurred. Now, they've been formally charged with espionage, an offence that can carry the death penalty. An Iranian official said The individuals arrested entered Iran under the guise of tourists and under the guise of research and investigation work. These individuals were cooperating with covert institutions related to the intelligence services of hostile and Western countries. Their destination was Australia, with a mission to conduct academic research. Lindsay Foreman holds a PhD in psychology and a belief that most people are good, she says. But they knew the risk they were taking by entering Iran, a fear expressed in a social media post before they crossed the border. Many have suffered at the hands of the regime, like dual British-Iranian nationals Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe and Anousheh Ashouri. The pair spent more than 5 years in detention before the UK government negotiated their release, something we spoke to Mr. Ashouri about.
And apologies, we had some technical issues with that piece there. But joining me now is Iranian-American journalist Jason Razaian, who was imprisoned in Iran for 544 days. Jason, thank you so much for joining us here on the programme. We're just hearing there about that British couple, but of course, you know all too well what it's like being held in Iran, being sent to an Iranian prison, being charged with espionage. And frankly, you and your wife were initially arrested together.
That's right. It's now 10 and a half years since we were arrested. At that time, there had seemingly been a lull in the Islamic Republic taking foreign nationals hostage and using them in this way. It has since exploded following our case and Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe's case, and so many others, many that we never hear about in the news. But this has become a pattern, one that unfortunately doesn't seem like it has an end, and nor do democratic governments like the United States or the UK have a great plan at how to slow it down.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you say, it's been 10 years since your arrest, and I remember it was, such a massive global talking point. But because it happens so often now, we can sometimes find foreign nationals languishing in Iranian prisons with very little attention on their cases.
Well, I think there's multiple problems involved with this larger issue of the Islamic Republic taking hostages. One, a lot of people and families of individuals who are taken in this way are counseled to remain quiet. Oftentimes, though, the Islamic Republic makes that decision for you. They put it out into the world, just as they have with this couple, and make the most outlandish, ludicrous, audacious claims of espionage or other sorts of crimes against Iranian national security, when you can see very clearly that it's just a couple who want to go out and see the world, experience the world, and as your report indicated, fundamentally believe that most people are good. I'd like to believe that as well, but there are a growing number of governments, the Iranian government, the Afghan government or the Taliban, the Venezuelan, Russian, Chinese governments that are more often than ever taking our citizens hostage, using them as leverage in negotiations with our government.
Jason, I'm just going to keep you there for a second because we've got just some developing news that's come in. We're going to go live to the United States and listen to President Donald Trump, who is currently talking about these talks in Saudi between Russia and the United States. Let's have a listen in.
I was president, and it's a shame to see it. And I see pictures that you don't see, but I see pictures of fields that look just horrible. It looks like Gettysburg. If you see the old pictures of Gettysburg, it's soldiers lying all over the field, body parts all over the field. They're all dead. And this is going on a daily basis. It's a horrible thing. Both Russia and Ukraine, they're losing thousands and thousands of soldiers. And a lot of people have been killed, too. I think that's one of the things that you'll see historically and you'll see later on as it goes along. I think people are going to be surprised at how many people, not only soldiers, have been killed in Ukraine. A lot more people than you think. Yeah, please.
President Trump, as part of a peace deal with Putin, would you be willing to consider removing all American troops from Europe?
Well, nobody's asked me to do that, so I don't think we'd have to do that. I wouldn't want to do that. But that question's never really come up. Yeah. Please.
Sir, do you support stationing European peacekeeping troops in Ukraine as part of this peace deal?
If they want to do that, that's great. I'm all for it. If they want to do that, I think that'd be fine.
Even if the Russians are...
I mean, I know France has mentioned it. Others have mentioned it. UK has mentioned it. But, yeah, if we have a peace deal, I think having troops over there from the standpoint of Europe, we won't have to put any over there because, we're very far away. But having troops over there would be fine. I would not object to it at all. We're talking about this now, peace. We have either a ceasefire or a peace itself, and we're looking to do both. We'd start off with the ceasefire, and if they want to do that, I know France was willing to do that, and I thought that was a beautiful gesture. Yeah, please.
Do you have any message for Ukrainians who, after 3 years of fighting, might feel betrayed or disappointed at not having a seat at these initial talks in Saudi Arabia?
Well, I think I'm really disappointed in what's happened. I've been watching this for 3 years. It's a war that would have never happened if I was president, and I've been watching these people being killed at levels that you've rarely seen, not even close, since the Second World War. And I'm very disappointed. I hear that, they're upset about not having a seat. Well, they've had a seat for 3 years and a long time before that. This could have been settled very easily. Just a half-baked negotiator could have settled this years ago without the loss of much land, very little land, without the loss of any lives, and without the loss of cities that are just laying on their sides. You have those magnificent golden domes that are shattered, will never be replaced. You can't replace them. 1,000-year-old domes that are so beautiful, you can't replace that. A whole civilization has changed because of what. So when they're worried about not being seated, you mean somebody that should have gone in and made a deal a long time ago? You could have made a deal. This is one that could have made a deal. There was no talk of this during the Trump administration. Putin would have never, ever done it. And by the way, we wouldn't have had October 7th. You know that. We wouldn't have had October 7th either in Israel. And we wouldn't have had that mess that's going on over there. It's like we have great fire people here. We're putting out fires. All over the world, we're putting out fires. So that wouldn't have happened. And you know what else wouldn't have happened? Inflation. Because it was caused really by the cost of energy going through the roof because of their bad energy policies and also their spending, their terrible spending, wasteful spending on the Green New Scam. It's a scam. It's a whole big scam. Yeah, please.
Yes, sir. I want to ask you a little closer to home. What would it take for you to reconsider the restrictions on the Associated Press? And secondly, some of your advisors are concerned with the Associated Press's style guide, using language and giving guidance to not use words like illegal immigrant or to use phrases like gender-affirming care. And they're concerned about that being an encroaching amount of liberalism in the way in which the press writes about things. Do you share those concerns?
Well, I do think that some of the phrases that they want to use are ridiculous, and I think, frankly, they become obsolete, especially in the last 3 weeks, because many things have happened in the last 3 weeks. And I didn't know about that, but I would say that if they want to use certain phrases like that, and I guess some are okay, but many aren't, but the Associated Press just refuses to go with what the law is and what is taking place. It's called the Gulf of America now. It's not called the Gulf of Mexico any longer. I have the right to do it, just like we have the right to do Mount McKinley, and nobody's even challenging that. But only the essentially, it's primarily the Associated Press, and I don't know what they're doing, but I just say that we're going to keep them out until such time as they agree that it's the Gulf of America. We're very proud of this country, and we want it to be the Gulf of America. Now, the Associated Press, as you know, has been very, very wrong on the election, on Trump and the treatment of Trump, and other things having to do with Trump and Republicans and conservatives. And they're doing us no favors, and I guess I'm not doing them any favors. That's the way life works. But, thank you for the question. Who are you with? Very good question. Thank you. Yes.
We're hearing that Russia wants to force Ukraine to hold new elections in order to sign any kind of a peace deal. Is that something that the U.S. would ever support?
Well, we have a situation where we haven't had elections in Ukraine, where we have martial law, or essentially martial law in Ukraine, where the leader in Ukraine, I mean, I hate to say it, but he's down at 4% approval rating, and where a country has been blown to smithereens. You got most of the cities are laying on their sides. The buildings are collapsed. It looks like a massive demolition site. So many of the cities. I mean, they haven't done it in Kiev because I guess they don't want to shoot too many rockets in there. They've done it 20%, but they haven't done it 100%. If they wanted to do it 100%, it would probably happen very quickly. But you have cities that are absolutely decimated. And yeah, I would say that, when they want a seat at the table, you could say the people wouldn't the people of Ukraine have to say, like, it's been a long time since we've had an election. That's not a Russia thing. That's something coming from me and coming from many other countries also. Ukraine is being just wiped out. Look at what's happening to the cities. There are cities, there's not even a building standing. It's a massive, you talk about Gaza. I mean, it's literally, these cities look like Gaza. Actually, many have, percentage-wise, more buildings knocked down than in Gaza. So, people are tired of it. People want to see something happen. And, the other thing that it's been bothering me for a long time, because I solved the problem with NATO. They paid hundreds of billions of dollars into the funds of NATO when I said, you got to pay, because the United States was paying for European countries, and then they take advantage of us on trade. But I've seen it. Look, they have to pay. They have to find out, where's the money going to? We have, I believe President Zelensky said last week that he doesn't know where half of the money is that we gave him. Well, we gave them, I believe, $350 billion, but let's say it's something less than that, but it's a lot. And we have to equalize with Europe, because Europe has given us given a very much smaller percentage than that. I think Europe has given $100 billion, and we've given, let's say, 300 plus, and it's more important for them than it is for us. We have an ocean in between, and they don't. But where is all the money that's been given? Where is it going? And I've never seen an accounting of it. We give hundreds of billions of dollars. I don't see any accounting. So I want to see peace. Look, you know why because I don't want all these people killed anymore. I'm looking at people that are being killed, and they're Russian and Ukrainian people, but they're people. Doesn't matter where they're from on the whole planet. And I think I have the power to end this war. And I think it's going very well. But today I heard, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal. I could have made a deal for Ukraine that would have given them almost all of the land, everything, almost all of the land, and no people would have been killed, and no city would have been demolished, and not one dome would have been knocked down. But they chose not to do it that way. And President Biden, in all fairness, he doesn't have a clue. What he was so bad for this. He was so bad, so pathetic, so sad. But with all of that being said, look, it is what it is. When I left, there was no chance that this could have happened. But it happened because we had incompetent leadership at many different levels. But when you see what's taken place in Ukraine with millions of people killed, including the soldiers, millions of people killed, a big percentage of their cities knocked down to the ground. I don't know how anybody even lives there. When they say they took a poll and Zelensky's at 4%, who's living there? It's hard to believe that people live there. Their cities are being knocked down, and this is something that would have never happened. And by the way, for 4 years, it didn't happen. It was never going to happen. Go ahead.
One follow-up question. How would you counter the perception, because Russia's pushing for this, obviously, they don't really hold true elections, that would be a capitulation of some sort? How would you guard against potentially Russia installing a puppet government? And then finally, how would that new election have an impact on getting Zelensky to sign the rare earth minerals deal?
Look, you have leadership, and I like him personally. He's fine. But I don't care about personally. I care about getting the job done. You have leadership now that's allowed a war to go on that should have never even happened, even without the United States. Look, we had a president who was grossly incompetent. He had no idea what he was doing. He said some very stupid things, like going in for portions and all of the things. He made a lot of bad statements, but he's grossly incompetent, and I think everyone knew that. This is something that should have never happened, would have never happened. And I used to discuss it with Putin. President Putin and I would talk about Ukraine, and it was the apple of his eye, I will tell you that. But there was never a chance of him going in. And I told him, you better not go in, don't go in, don't go in. And he understood that. He understood it fully. But I'm only interested, I want to see if I can save maybe millions of lives. This could even end up in a World War III. I mean, to be honest with you, you've been hearing now Europe is saying, well, I think we're going to go in and we're going to go. All of a sudden, you're going to end up in World War III over something that should have never happened. And, you know, it's a very sad situation. Yeah, please.
In a court filing, the White House said that Elon Musk is not a DOJ employee and has no authority to make decisions. Can you clarify for us today
well, Elon
what his
Musk,
exact role is there?
Yeah. Elon is, to me, a patriot. So, you know, you could call him an employee, you could call him a consultant, you could call him whatever you want. But he's a patriot. I mean, look at the kind of things. I just said, just write it down, just in case that question got asked, right? And which I'm surprised it took so long, actually. But you know what? Ukraine's a bigger deal because people are dying by the thousands a week, thousands. But look at this, from 90 to 99, Social Security, 6,054,000 people. Well, that's okay, maybe that's possible. You know, 90 to 99, maybe it's possible. It's a lot of people, though, at that. But people that live to 100 to 109, 4,734,000. Wow, that's a lot. That means over 100 years old. They have 4 million people. I don't know too many. I know people that are doing great in their 90s, but not too many people over 100. But over 120, from 120 years old, people that are 120 years old up to 129, 3,472,000 people. Wow. You know, that can't possibly be because the record is like, I think it's one person, a woman, lived to 127, but they have 3,472. Okay, but now we're going really in. People from 130 years old to 139-year-old, 3,936,000. Wow. I wonder if people are getting paid with all this. I mean, are these checks? And that's what we're checking right now. People from 140 years old to 149 years old, 3,542,000, 140 years old and beyond. Now we're really going because we're looking to break the record by 25 years. People from 150 years old to 159 years old, 1,345,000. These are in the, by the way, these are in the computer files. This is what they do well. They're super. I asked Elon, who are these Doge people? He said they're super brilliant computer people and they love the country. It's simple. Wait a minute. People from 160 years old to 169 years, 121,000. So 160-year-old people. 170 to 179,000, 6,087. But now, let's go into the real numbers. From 200 to 209 years old, 879 people. From 210 years old, I haven't met any of them. And if I did, I would bless them. I would worship the ground they walk on. 210 to 219 years, 866. From 220 years old to 229 years old, 1,039. And then you have two people, from 240 years old to 249 years old, one person. And there's one person that's 360 years old. That's just that. And then, where's the money being spent, right? Let's go into that for just a second. $520 million for a consultant on the environment. It's called Environmental, Social, and Governance. Investments in Africa and mobilize private sector resources, $520 million. Somebody got $520 million for an environmental, sounds like an environmental study. I've always been one that paid a lot of money for my environmental studies, but I paid like $50,000, not $520 million. $520 million.
You're listening there to US President Donald Trump speaking at his home in Mar-a-Lago in Florida. Of course, those significant face-to-face talks began between US officials and Russian officials in Riyadh today about the potential for a ceasefire in Ukraine. So he was talking about feeling more confident after those Ukraine talks today, although there is no timeline set as yet for a meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. But he talked about the fact that the Europeans are not at the table at the moment and the Ukrainians are not at the table at the moment. He said that there is leadership that allowed a war to go on for 3 years, and now they want a seat at the table. This war should never have happened. It wouldn't have happened had I been in power, and that he had had that conversation with Vladimir Putin, had warned him about not going into Ukraine. He said that Ukraine was the apple of Vladimir Putin's eye, but that he had warned Vladimir Putin back when he was president the first time round, not to go to Ukraine. And he said that Vladimir Putin understood that. Let's bring in our US correspondent, James Matthews, who joins us from Washington. And James, feels like another day, another sort of Trump world reality show that we're hearing. But this press conference is significant because, of course, today we saw the first of those face-to-face talks between the US officials and the Russians, and he's talking off the back of that. He's currently talking about a few other issues, but he did discuss his initial thoughts on those face-to-face talks.
Yeah, hi, Yalda. Significant indeed, I think. Not for the first time. We heard Donald Trump cutting loose Volodymyr Zelensky there. He was asked about. The question was to do with Russia. The journalist said that we're hearing Russia wants elections in Ukraine prior to the signing of any peace deal. The way that Trump answered that was, well, yeah, you have a leader, he said, at 4% in the approval ratings. Ukraine looks like a demolition site, he said. If you want a seat at the table, wouldn't people say it's a long time since we've had elections? That's something coming from me, he said, and a lot of people. Earlier today, Zelensky postponed a trip to Saudi Arabia. We're getting a clear sense of why the Americans, Donald Trump in particular, would appear not to want him anywhere near that discussion table. As you said, he spoke about Putin, the conversation he had, Ukraine being the apple of Putin's eye. I told him, don't go in. He then said this could end in World War III. That's the words of the sitting president. Speaking about US funding, where is all the money going, he said, in terms of Europe. Bear in mind, European leaders watching this, trying to get a read on where Trump is and where he's taking them. He said, this is more important for Europe than us. We've got an ocean in between. So that kind of language very much reinforces the theme of today and the past few days. USA and Russia focusing on the bigger picture, the wider framework that restores their relations. Ukraine's key players, Zelensky among them, would appear to be very much receding into the distance in terms of Donald Trump's priorities. Nothing in that Ukraine wanted to hear, Yalda, and I think European leaders will be bristling too.
Yeah, absolutely, as they have been for the past week or so. James, thank you so much for your analysis. And we are keeping an eye on that press conference. If anything else comes out of it, we will definitely be going back to it. Well, last night we brought you images of a passenger plane in Toronto that overturned on a runway during snowy weather. All of the passengers survived, though 2 are still in hospital. Any major aviation accident will rattle travellers. But this is the fourth one in North America in recent weeks. First, a commercial jetliner and US Army helicopter collided near Washington's Reagan National Airport on the 29th of January, killing all 67 people on board both aircraft. 2 days later, a medical transportation plane crashed in Philadelphia, killing the 6 on board and another person on the ground. And on the 6th of February, 10 people were killed in a plane crash in Alaska. Investigations are underway into those 2 separate incidents, and an aviation expert says it's still safe to fly. Our data and forensics correspondent Tom Cheshire reports.
The moment when normality turns to disaster. But ends in a miracle.
Oh, no.
The plane hit the runway hard, sheared off a wing and flipped belly up. And so 76 passengers and 4 crew found themselves dangling upside down from their seats.
Our plane crashed. It's upside down.
But all alive. They scrambled out of the jet to the tarmac and to safety.
For me, it was just kind of like the wheels touched down, and then all of a sudden I just remember being fully sideways, and I was looking down and just seeing like sparks and flames and whatever was grinding against the ground. And then, yeah, it happened pretty dang quick, and we were just upside down hanging from our seatbelts.
There was nothing to indicate any trouble ahead of the crash. The Delta Airlines plane, a Bombardier CRJ-900 jet, made a normal approach into Toronto Airport, as shown in our reconstruction of Flight Radar 24 data. But the reaction caught in the air traffic control tower showed that they feared the worst.
543 ground runway 24 data scale altimeter 2993.
Looking at this video, it looks more like a steady, normal approach into land. What happens here?
It looks like the impact or the touchdown point is where the actual accident occurred. It's possible, because the aircraft is tilting slightly to the right, so it's rolled to the right. It's possible that the wingtip of the starboard wingtip touched the ground, causing the wing to detach. And you get the flames and the smoke immediately upon landing.
You watch this video and then you see that contact on the right-hand side, and after that, the plane detaches and it flips as a result.
You've got lift on one side from the wing that's still there and no lift on the other, so it's not balanced and the aircraft will roll very quickly.
The jet flipped as easily as a toy. But this apparently fragile shell kept its passengers safe. It could so easily have been a tragedy instead. The investigation will unpick how disaster came so close. Tom Cheshire, Sky News.
Let's turn now to the civil war in Sudan. It began in April 2023 when the army and a powerful paramilitary group, the Rapid Support Forces, began a vicious struggle for power. It's estimated that more than 61,000 people have died in Khartoum state alone. The fighting has led to an economic collapse with more than 30 million people, over 2/3 of the population, in need of aid. The Sudanese army have been making significant gains recently and now control most of the north and east of the country, while the RSF continues to have strongholds in the southwest. Much of the conflict has been centred around the cities, with the RSF and Sudanese military still battling control for the capital, Khartoum. Sudanese armed forces have been quickly taking back territory, though, and in the last few weeks alone, they've made major advances, capturing a critical bridge connecting Khartoum north to the very heart of the capital. Our Africa correspondent, Yusra El-Begir, has been hearing from residents in newly liberated areas in northern Khartoum.
The cramped corners of Sudan's war-torn capital, heaving with persistent life. People are squeezed into this surviving market for their livelihoods, as RSF shelling tears into the edges of army-held territory, killing close to 60 civilians in their latest strike, and wounding hundreds who never asked for this war.
People just trying to eat. They have nothing to do with the military, nothing to do with this war.
The crowds thin to nothing as we move south. The central market is still barren. Its stalls are too devastated to restore. The few who have returned are waiting for news from across the Nile, where the army are making gains to reclaim Khartoum from the RSF. the militia they once armed and trained, finally losing its grip.
We're in an area that's just been reclaimed over the last 24 hours. We've been told to turn left rather than right because they said that the RSF troops are not far from here.
They're proud of their latest push, telling the thousands who once lived here to come back. But Kafuri, a once vibrant neighborhood full of familial homes, is now an expanding army garrison, with enemy remains splayed across their new defense posts. The families that are here are the ones who never left. Their youngest enthused by news of victory, but skinny from the stress of survival. Holding on in a home scarred by shelling.
Children, this was very difficult for them, especially when bombs and fighting. Terrible. They were getting crazy, I think. One of our children, he was very, very, very upset and very frightened always.
He shows us where his grandchildren would take cover from the bombs, cowering in the dark with over a year of no electricity or running water. For the weakened and wounded, there are few hospitals left. The ones that are functioning use up every inch of free space. Even the reception is an active ward.
Everything that you ever heard about war, we have seen it here. Endless suffering, of course, of everyone. Injured patients, their families, their parents, kids, amputation, death, everything. This war has been a nightmare for Sudanese people.
A nightmare for all ages. A 10-year-old boy hit by a stray bullet. A grown man sickened by the harsh conditions. This is a capital on the cusp of military victory. Its residents broken by the brutality of their war. Yusr al-Bagher, Sky News, Khartoum State.
Now, I just want to bring you an update on the health of the Pope. He's been in hospital since Friday after suffering from bronchitis. Let's bring in our Europe correspondent, Adam Parsons. And Adam, there's been a lot of concern about the health of the Pope. Just bring us up to date.
Yeah, there is concern. The Pope has asked people to continue praying for him. And the bottom line is that he is ill. He remains in hospital with a polymicrobial infection and bilateral pneumonia. Now, what that means is that he's got pneumonia in both of his lungs and that he has a combination of bacterial and viral infections. So antibiotics are helpful to an extent with that, but also he needs a wider ranging support. He needs rest. Now, at the moment, he is not on a ventilator. He has no artificial means to keep him breathing. But the Vatican has said that the treatment that he is receiving is becoming more complex. Now, I think it is worth saying that the Pope is continuing to read his text. He is reading newspapers. He is still having conversations with people, but his official engagements have been cancelled up until Sunday, this being a busy time for the Catholic Church. So that decision will not have been taken lightly. The Pope is 88 years old. He has had difficult health in recent years. He had bronchitis back in 2023. And remember that this is somebody who, as a young adult, when he was 21, had part of one of his lungs removed due to pleurisy. So he is prone to suffer particularly from these sort of infections. But there is concern as he rests in the Gemelli hospital about his condition, and his followers in Italy, in Britain and around the world will, I'm sure, be following his request to keep the Pope in their prayers.
Yeah, absolutely. Adam, thank you so much. Now, we talked about Ukraine at the top of the programme, and I just want to talk about China now. Donald Trump has made it clear he wants Europe to fend for itself while the US focuses elsewhere, including China. A long-running flashpoint in that part of the world is the South China Sea. China claims to own most of it, but that's disputed by countries in the region, including Indonesia, Malaysia and the Philippines. Our Asia correspondent saw tensions flaring firsthand aboard a Philippines Navy ship last year as it was sprayed by water cannon from a Chinese vessel. Have a look.
The force is ferocious. The worst they've ever seen.
You can feel the water coming through. There is nothing subtle about this.
That was Cordelia Lynch there. Well, those images show a powerful Chinese water cannon being fired at a Filipino supply vessel. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has criticized what he calls China's destabilizing actions in the South China Sea. He met his Philippines counterpart at the Munich Security Conference. Afterwards, I sat down with Foreign Secretary Enrico Manalo and asked him how that conversation went.
Well, I think we're both aware that though we face many challenges, probably our principal security challenge is the tensions in the South China Sea, and I appraised Secretary Rubio of the situation. Tensions remain, obviously, and the important thing is that we try and find ways to see how we can either lower the tensions or address them in a way that they don't escalate into something more.
Do you think the United States, given what we're hearing in terms of what they're saying to the Europeans, for example, or the kind of tariffs that the President Trump is placing on friends and foes, do you believe that the United States is a reliable ally for you?
Well, in my discussions, I think, for example, with Secretary Rubio, I think we were on the same page in the sense that our relationship, and I'm speaking from the Philippine perspective, our relationship with the United States is really based on enduring interests. We have common interests, and these are interests, I think, which will outlast any particular official administration from both sides. And essentially, our conversation reaffirmed this.
USAID is also a body that had a number of projects in the Philippines. We're seeing now many of those projects halted. Where does that leave the Philippines, for example? And did you raise that with the Secretary?
Well, we have, Philippines has benefited, as other countries have, from the USAID. And certainly we appreciate the program very much. In many ways, it's been there for many years. Of course, the decision made by the United States is its own sovereign decision. So obviously, we can't question the right of the U.S. to make such a decision. Nevertheless, in my discussions with Secretary Rubio, not only the other day, but I had a phone call with him also, he did express the possibility that certain programs might be reviewed. And so therefore, we'll just have to wait and see how what might turn out.
While we often hear, certainly at this point in time, the United States talking about the war in Ukraine, the focus of Washington, though, is China. Are you worried that countries like yourself, the Philippines, is going to somehow become a pawn in some kind of greater rivalry or great game between these two states?
We all have a stake in the future of the region. And our aim is really to assert ourselves in such a way that the future of the region is not determined by the big powers. And so all the more that we have to speak out on issues. And I have always said that, for example, the situation in the South China Sea, for example, should not be viewed from the perspective of the rivalry of the United States and China. The Philippines has its own interests, and if these interests are affected, then we have to take whatever appropriate action we can. We hope it doesn't escalate, and that's why we for example, we have a regular dialogue with China. where we discuss the situation in the South China Sea and any incidents that may arise. We have our ASEAN partners. So I think our approach now really should be to see how tensions don't escalate into something more.
Foreign Secretary, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
That was the Philippines Foreign Secretary there. Well, that's it from me and the team here tonight. Gillian is with you for Sky News at 10. Good night.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem. Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
Free, wherever you get your news. The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.